Good morning. I'm here in Avila Beach, California on the Central Coast. I'm walking just west of town now to the Pecho Coast Trail, where I'm going to take a guided hike by a PG&E docent across their land for the Diablo Canyon energy plant to the lighthouse way out in the point. It's not very far, only a few miles, but it's kind of special as it's restricted normally, and you can only access the land with a PG&E docent. So I'm doing that today. Come along and join me.
Vine growing on the ground over here is called vinca. It's a really common ornamental vine. These things just kind of taken over this area. The only reason we bring this up is as we get further out on the trail, we're not going to see many non-native plants at all. It'll be almost exclusively California native plants. And we'll talk about those a little bit as we're going. There's a couple of boxes we walk by right back there, and those are to measure any release of radioactivity from Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. It's about 7 miles up the coast. We're not going to see it today. But it's up there. If there were ever to be a release of radioactivity, it's picked up by those boxes, and they would set off alarms if it's at a level high enough to be dangerous to people. It sets off an alarm throughout the canyon for people to evacuate. We've never had to evacuate. I've lived here for the entire time the Diablo Canyon's been out there, so never had to evacuate, but there have been 2 times that they've had slight elevations in the background radiation picked up by the boxes. Once in 1986, when Chernobyl had the accident in what is now Ukraine. That was picked up by these boxes. And then when Fukushima had their accident in 2012, I think it was, that was picked up by those boxes.
Wow.
Slight increase in background radiation, but they knew it was there. So we know the boxes work, and luckily we haven't had a release from Diablo Canyon. Okay, so we're going to start up one of the bigger hills on the trail. Okay? All right, here we go.
Is there a water source at the lighthouse?
Is there what?
A water source?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Good herb in Spanish, and Native Americans would use that, make a tea out of it. They said it cured upset stomachs. Today you can buy it in health food stores for the same purpose, or just as an air freshener. Makes a nice mint tea, has kind of a minty smell. Real interesting thing about that plant, there used to be a town to the north of us that was named after that plant. It was called Yerba Buena. But the town's still there, but they've changed the name now, and they now call it San Francisco. That whole area used to be called Yerba Buena.
There's still Yerba Buena.
There's still an island out in the middle of the bay called Yerba Buena Island. Okay, we're going to be walking on this road now for a bit. The reason we're walking on a road is that portions of the original trail have been lost due to coastal bluff erosion.
Ooh.
And so we had to bypass those areas. This road was built in 1960. All right, this plant right here is called coffeeberry. And we can see a couple of new berries coming out. They're green when they first come out. They'll turn a red color, and then after they ripen, a real dark brown, almost a black color. They almost look like a coffee bean. Native Americans would take the leaves, the berries, and the bark and make a tea out of it, and they use it for medicinal purposes. They said it was a very, very strong laxative. And they needed that because they ate a lot of acorn mush, which can be real binding to the system. You need to have something to keep things moving.
Yeah.
So we're always telling people on the hike, if you've got those issues, pick a couple of berries, but wait until the way back, not on the way out, because it's real fast acting.
Fast acting.
The second pier you see out there, today they call it the Cal Poly Pier. It was built by the railroad company, taken over very quickly after the railroad company built it by Unocal. And they put a pipeline all the way along the pier so they get bigger and bigger ships to carry their oil. It sticks further out into the water. In 1984, that was destroyed by storms, completely wiped out the pier. Unocal rebuilt it in '84. By the end of the 1900s, Unocal decided they probably weren't going to stay in Avila any longer, or California. They were being required to clean up the ground underneath the groundwater and the soil underneath Avila because their pipelines have been leaking oil for many, many years, and it finally caught up to them. So they had to clean it up. They said, we're out of here. Not staying here anymore. They were just going to abandon the pier. Coastal Commission had given them a permit to rebuild that pier. Coastal Commission said, you can't abandon it. It's part of the permit requirements where if you ever leave, you have to donate it to a marine-centered use or demolish it. You can't just leave it there. So they decided to donate it to Cal Poly.
Cool.
Jim handed me one of these. This is actually a bulb that's underneath the ground, and so we never even see this except when we dig one up. It's called soap plant. The bulb under the ground is what gives it its name. If you crush this, it produces a white latex material that can be used as soap. They mix it with water, and the Native Americans would use it as a soap. They also would take this and concentrate that white fluid and use it to make glue to stick feathers and onto their arrow shafts and things like that. And lastly, they would take these bulbs and crush them and throw them in a stream. And it temporarily paralyzes the fish. The fish rise to the surface and they walk in the stream and pick up the fish. I don't think that'd be legal today. Back then, it was perfectly legal. So this was soap plant. I didn't talk about the last pier yet.
Oh yeah.
Right down here is the Hartford Pier, built after John Hartford, built by John Hartford, the same guy who built the first pier down there. He built this with his own money. He said, this is where you need to build a pier because it's protected by this point of land that we're walking out on today. And that pier has never been demolished by storms. The breakwater was built in over a period of time. Okay. The very first sections of it were probably the mid-1800s. It was completed to the length that we see today by 1935. But this is a native bunch grass. This is called a ryegrass, a limus. Native Americans would use this plant extensively. They would collect the seed from this and mix it with acorn mush and make breads and things like that out of it. It's a rye seed. They take the stalks of that, and some of the plants are much bigger than what this is, but if they get a big one, the stalk can be used as a throwing spear, or if they're small like this, they use it as a straw because it's hollow on the inside. Cool. They would take the leaves from this and use it as thatch to build baskets and also for roofs for their houses. A really important plant to the Native Americans.
Nice.
There's a real strong sagey smell to it, even though it's not a true sage at all. Native Americans would take a stalk of that and burn it in their religious ceremonies. They said it was a very cleansing smell, cleansing to their soul. It was also an active cattle ranch out here. And the cowboys at the end of the day might want to go into the bar. They didn't have a place to take a bath or anything. They rubbed themselves down with sagebrush. So it got the nickname Cowboy Cologne. This one is called black sage, and this is a true sage. Native Americans would use the leaf, and the little ball on that is the seed pod and the flower pod from earlier flowerings. They would use all of that as flavoring for their food. Really important plant to the Native Americans. Well, we want to talk about this side of the road because this is a really good example of coastal scrub vegetation. It's probably the dominant vegetation type in southern and central California, all along the coast. And a couple of the plants associated with this community were really important to early settlers. This one is called California sagebrush. All right, this is where we leave the road and start heading down the trail. Occasionally in a Mexican restaurant, you'll see pollo pecho on the menu, chicken breast. So pecho is breast in Spanish. So there's several different ways that we've heard that this coastline right here might have been given the name Pecho. The first one being that early settlers, I'm sorry, not early settlers, but the early mariners coming up the coast. They're usually Portuguese and Spanish sailors, maybe some Mexicans thrown in with it, but they're coming up the coast and they round Point Conception, and all of a sudden the landform changes and they start seeing these rolling hills like this, and it reminded them of their women back home. They called it the Pecho Coast because of that. And sure enough, in all the nautical logs from the time, they called this the Pecho Coast. We used to tell that story quite often on our hikes, and then the archaeologist up at Diablo Canyon, PG&E's property, said, that's a fun story, but it's probably not true. That actually the name originated from the Chumash name, the Native American name for a village that they had right up by where Diablo is. And that name sounded to the Spanish like Pecho, so they named the whole coastline Pecho Coast. So if you go up to Montana de Oro and hike the Point Bouchon Trail, you'll see, you come to Windy Point and you'll see a little placard talking about the Pecho Ranch. Well, that's where the whole name came from. And so they named it Pecho because of that. So you can pick your choose of which of those stories you like. Anyway, it gets the name Pecho Coast. And the trail was actually a cooperative effort of Pacific Gas and Electric, the Coastal Commission, and the Nature Conservancy initially. All right, so we're going to head down the biggest hill on the trail. Luckily, Jim brought the key for the escalator for the way back, right? All right, so we've come into this section of the trail where we've got one plant that's kind of taken over everything. We have this monoculture of this plant. It's called toyon. Toyon also has some other names to it. It used to be called California holly by early settlers because of the serrated edge to the leaf. They thought it looked like European holly, and it produces a red berry during the winter. Also called Christmas berry because it produces a red berry in the winter. This plant is a transitional plant from coastal scrub to more of a chaparral community. You look at the trunks; they're much sturdier than what the coastal scrub plants are. You can easily bushwhack through coastal scrub, but bushwhacking through toyon would be a much harder thing. Okay, so there's a town to the south of us that was named after this plant. They should have called it Toyon Wood, but they called it Hollywood instead. And they got its name because before there was a city of Hollywood, there was a residential subdivision called Hollywood Land. And they put up that sign, and it originally said Hollywood Land. And they named that because to put up the residential subdivision, they cut down all the California holly, the Toyon.
Okay.
So it should have been Toyon Wood. Today, everybody, just associates with Hollywood, but it was this subdivision up in the hills that was really what got it started.
So now we're coming on to Harbor District land, the 30 acres where the lighthouse is.
Back in the mid-1800s, a family called the Smith family decided they didn't want to live in the whaler village, which was right down here on the bluff, because they'd have to pay rent to the family that ran cattle out here. And they said, well, can we move out there on that rock? At the time, California wasn't a state. Nobody owned that. So they said, yeah, nobody owns that. You can move out there. They hired some laborers to go out and flatten off 5 spots where they could put houses out on that rock. There were 5 houses out there.
No way.
Wow.
And the rock has not gotten smaller. So if you don't believe me, you look at the lower right-hand corner of that display right there, and it shows you the 5 houses out there.
Wow.
Now, they're not the size of houses that we normally see today. They're pretty small. The Smith family were there for about 10 years, about the same amount of time as the whaling industry. When the whalers packed up their bags and left, the Smith family left also. And another family, the Gregory family, came in and took over the rock, took over all the houses on the rock. And they lived out there until the 1920s. We're told the Gregory family had as many as 14 children, and 11 of them were born on that rock. That's called Smith Island. We had a whaling village down here, and this cove was used for commercial whaling. They would row out in a longboat, 6 to 8 people, oaring out to where the whales were, hand harpoon the whales, drag them into this cove, and slaughter them right there in the cove. Wow. During the peak of the whaling season, that cove would be blood red most of the time. Wow. And the reason they did that was to get the blubber from the whales. The carcass, they just used the carcass to boil the blubber down as a source of fuel to boil the blubber down. It produced a really heavy black smoke, stinky smoke, that blew into Avila and Pismo Beach. So that was one of the reasons that they only lasted about 10 years. They started complaining, and that was like the last straw, and the whalers left town. So that was the end of the whaling industry here. All right, so the lighthouse is just beyond the trees that we see down there. We have to go down some really steep hills, stairs once again, so watch your step.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much.
Free.
Appreciate
Thank
it. All right. Thank you.